Hello and welcome to Marple's Mind, where every story feels like a conversation. Over a warm cup of coffee today, I bring you a brand new Miss Marple mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in. From now, let's get started. For Chapter 1, The Holly-Wreathed Welcome. The train from London puffed into St Mary Mead station at precisely 3:17 p.m. on the afternoon of December 18th, trailing a plume of steam that curled like incense around the holly wreaths hanging from every lamp-post. Miss Jane Marple stepped down onto the platform, with the brisk economy of a woman who had never wasted emotion in her 70-odd years. Her grey wool coat was buttoned to the throat, her sensible felt hat pinned at exactly the right angle, and in her gloved hand she carried a small brown suitcase tied with string, nothing more ostentatious than what any respectable spinster might bring home for Christmas. Mr. Stringer, the station porter, touched his cap. "Welcome back, Miss Marple. Your nephew's man telephoned. Said the car would be waiting." "Thank you, Arthur. I see the village has dressed itself properly this year." She nodded toward the station's arched entrance, where Mrs. Price from the Flower Committee was wrestling with a particularly obstinate strand of ivy. "Though I fear Mrs. Price is in danger of strangling the holly, rather than framing it." Arthur chuckled and hefted the suitcase. "Same as ever, miss. Nothing changes in St Mary Mead." Miss Marple's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "That, Arthur, is what people always say just before everything changes." The Daimler, borrowed, she suspected, from her nephew Raymond's publishing friends in London, stood idling at the curb, its chrome bumper gleaming beneath a dusting of snow. The chauffeur, a thin young man with a nervous tick in his left eye, leapt to open the door. "Miss Marple, Mr. West sent me. Said to take you straight to the old manor house." "How very kind of Raymond," she murmured, settling into the leather seat. "Though I had intended to walk. One sees so much more at 3 miles an hour." The drive through the village took less than 5 minutes, yet it was enough for Miss Marple to catalogue the seasonal alterations. The Bantry's lawn now boasted a life-sized wooden reindeer that appeared to be winking. The butcher's window displayed a pyramid of turkeys wearing paper crowns. And outside the Blue Boar, Mr. Polk the landlord was supervising the erection of a Christmas tree so large it threatened to scrape the pub's sign. The old manor house, her own modest cottage, left to her by an aunt who had never quite approved of spinsterhood, looked exactly as she had left it in October, except for the wreath on the door. Someone had woven crimson berries through the holly with rather more enthusiasm than artistry. Cherry Baker, her daily help, opened the door before the chauffeur could knock. "Miss Marple, you're early. The kettle's barely on. And look at you, thin as a rail. London never feeds anyone properly." "Cherry, my dear, I have been fed quite adequately, though I will admit to missing your seed cake." Miss Marple allowed herself to be divested of coat and hat. "Now tell me everything. Who has arrived for Christmas, and who ought not to have been invited?" Cherry's round face lit with the delight of sanctioned gossip. "Well, the big house, Dane Mead I mean, is full to bursting. Mrs. Bantry's taken in her American cousin, Mr. Jefferson Hogg, the one what made all that money in moving pictures. And there's Miss Lydia Farrar staying too. She's the actress, ever so glamorous, though between you and me she drinks her breakfast through a straw. Then Colonel Bantry's nephew, Captain Wainwright come down from Aldershot. And Cherry lowered her voice to a thrilled whisper. The Lestranges are back. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose a fraction. Both of them, Mr. Geoffrey and Mrs. Valerie, though she's calling herself Madame Valerie now, with an accent and all. Opened a boutique in Bond Street, they say. Silk stockings and scent, very continental. The sitting-room fire crackled a welcome. Miss Marple sat in her usual chair by the window, accepting a cup of tea strong enough to stand a spoon in. Through the lace curtains she could see the high street, children pelting each other with snowballs. The grocer's boy cycling perilously with a crate of Brussels sprouts and, her gaze sharpened, a tall figure in a camel-hair coat pausing beneath the lamp-post opposite the vicarage. Cherry, who is that gentleman? The one with the red scarf. Cherry peered over her shoulder. That's Mr. Sebastian Drake. Arrived yesterday on the London train. Took the corner room at the Blue Boar. Very quiet, keeps to himself, though Mr. Polk says he asked ever so many questions about the big houses. Dane Mead, the old priory, even Gossington Hall, though it's been empty these 10 years. Miss Marple sipped her tea. A stranger asking questions is rarely a stranger for long in St. Mary Mead. The afternoon post brought 3 Christmas cards, a bill from her London dressmaker, and a note in Raymond's impatient scrawl. Aunt Jane, Hogg insists on a house party. Bantry's begged me to beg you. Come for dinner tomorrow. Ah. She was considering her reply when the doorbell rang again. Cherry returned with a silver salver bearing a single card. Mr. Sebastian Drake in elegant copperplate. And beneath it, pencilled in a hurried hand, if Miss Marple would grant me 5 minutes on a matter of mutual interest. Cherry's eyes were round as saucers. Shall I show him in, miss? Miss Marple set down her cup. Yes, Cherry, and bring the seed cake. A man who writes in pencil is either very busy or very careless, and in either case he will be hungry. Mr. Drake proved to be taller than he had appeared at a distance, with the kind of dark good looks that photograph well but seldom age gracefully. His camel hair coat was damp with melting snow. Beneath it, he wore a charcoal suit that had cost more than Cherry earned in a year. He refused the cake, but accepted tea. Miss Marple, he began without preamble, I believe you are acquainted with Mrs. Valerie Lestrange. I have known Valerie since she was in pigtails and stolen jam, though I understand she now prefers to be addressed as Madame Valerie. A flicker of something amusement, irritation, crossed his face. She has engaged my services. I am a private inquiry agent. Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her work-basket the moment Cherry left the room, clicked steadily. She was knitting scarves for the African missionaries. The wool was a particularly aggressive shade of mustard. Valerie requires investigation. How intriguing. She requires protection. 3 weeks ago she received this. From an inner pocket he produced a small box wrapped in silver paper, tied with crimson ribbon. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a single sprig of holly and a card. The message was printed in block capitals. Your present is coming. Count the days. Miss Marple turned the card over with delicate precision. Postmarked London, W.I. The ribbon is from Selfridge's, last year's Christmas stock, I believe, and the holly berries are plastic. Real ones would have stained the velvet. Drake's eyes narrowed. You notice details. One notices what one is accustomed to notice. Tell me, Mr. Drake, has Valerie any notion who might send such a gift? She insists it is a prank. Her husband laughs it off. But 2 days later, a similar parcel was delivered to Miss Lydia Farrar at her flat in Chelsea. Same wrapping, same message. Miss Farrar is also a guest at Mead this Christmas. Miss Marple laid the box on the table between them. And you have come to St. Mary Mead because I believe the sender will follow, because Mrs. Lestrange refuses police protection, and because he hesitated, then produced a second card from his wallet. This arrived at my office this morning. The message was identical, but beneath it, someone had added in the same block capitals. Ask the old lady in the cottage. She knows. Miss Marple studied the card for a long moment. Outside, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, soft flakes drifting past the window like silent witnesses. "Well, Mr. Drake," she said at last, "it seems we are all to receive Christmas presents this year. Let us hope they are not the kind one cannot return." She rose and crossed to the mantelpiece, where a small brass clock ticked with comfortable regularity. "You will dine at Mead tomorrow?" "I have been invited. Then we shall meet again. In the meantime, I suggest you lock your door at the Blue Boar, and perhaps," her eyes twinkled, "avoid the mistletoe." After Drake had gone, Miss Marple stood at the window, watching his tall figure disappear into the swirling snow. Cherry bustled in to clear the tea things. "Queer sort of visitor, miss. All questions and no cake." "Questions are his profession, Cherry, and cake is not always the answer." Miss Marple turned back to the room, her gaze falling on the silver box, though I must confess, I am rather partial to a mystery wrapped in ribbon. Upstairs, she unpacked with methodical care. From the bottom of her suitcase, she drew a small leather-bound notebook, her casebook, though she would never have called it that aloud. On the first blank page, she wrote in her neat slanting hand, 18th of December, St. Mary Mead gift, Jabosha 1, Holly Sprig. Threat to VL, gift number 2, identical to LF gift. B3 to SD references old lady. Suspects too early. Motive, revenge, jealousy, money. Note, plastic berries. Curious economy in a threat. She closed the book and slipped it into her handbag. Below, the church bells began to ring for evensong, their bronze voices muffled by snow. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, picked up her umbrella, and stepped out into the winter evening. In the churchyard, the graves were already wearing white caps. She paused beside the lich gate, where a notice board announced the times of carol services and the annual Christmas bazaar. Someone had pinned a sprig of holly to the board. Beneath it, almost hidden, was a tiny silver ribbon. Miss Marple unpinned the ribbon and tucked it into her glove. Then, with the serene expression of a woman going to post a letter, she walked on toward the vicarage. Behind her, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they were made. In the Blue Boar, Sebastian Drake stood at his window watching the street. He saw the small figure in the grey coat pause beneath the lamp, saw her bend to examine something on the gate, saw her straighten and walk on without looking back. He reached for the telephone. In Mead, Valerie Lestrange poured herself another cocktail and told her reflection in the mirror that she was not afraid. In the cottage, Miss Marple hung her coat by the fire and opened her notebook again. She added a single line, "The presents have begun. Let the unwrapping commence." Chapter 2. The Tinsel-Wrapped Secret. The morning of December 19th broke clear and bitterly cold. Frost feathered the windows of the old manor house like lace spun by a malicious spider, and the milk on Cherry's doorstep had frozen solid in its bottle. Miss Marple, however, was already dressed and breakfasted by 8 o'clock, her notebook tucked into the pocket of a sensible tweed skirt, and her mind ticking along with the precision of the kitchen clock. Cherry clattered in with the post. 3 more cards, miss, and a parcel for you. hand-delivered, no stamp. She set a small box on the table. It was wrapped in gold paper, tied with silver tinsel, and addressed in the same block capitals, Miss Jane Marple, a Christmas token. Miss Marple turned the parcel over with the detachment of a bomb disposal expert. "Cherry, fetch my sewing scissors and the old newspaper. We shall open this on the hearth, just in case." The box yielded a porcelain figurine, larger than her thumb. A shepherdess in a pink crinoline, smiling vacantly. Tucked beneath the cotton wool was another card. Second day. She counted her sheep, but forgot the wolf. Cherry gasped. "It's a threat, miss." "It is a quotation," Miss Marple corrected gently. "Adapted from Little Bo Peep, though the grammar is lamentable. Still, one does not argue with anonymous correspondence." She wrapped the figurine in tissue and placed it on the mantelpiece beside yesterday's holly sprig. "Now, Cherry, I shall walk to Mead. Mrs. Bantry will be expecting me for coffee, and I find exercise sharpens the faculties." The lane to Mead glittered with ice. Miss Marple's stout boots crunched a steady rhythm, while she catalogued the overnight transformations. Fresh wreaths on every gate. A string of coloured bulbs flickering half-heartedly outside the post office. And, her stride faltered, a single silver ribbon fluttering from the branch of the yew tree that overhung the Danemid Drive. Someone had tied it in a perfect bow, the ends fluttering like a trapped bird. Colonel Bantry's butler, Muswell, admitted her with the mournful dignity of a man who had served in India and now found himself serving mince pies. "Mrs. Bantry is in the morning room, miss, with the other ladies." The morning room smelled of beeswax, wood smoke, and the particular brand of perfume favoured by women who could afford Paris. Mrs. Bantry, plump, flustered, and wrapped in puce velvet, rose to embrace her. "Jane, thank heaven! These Americans talk of nothing but calories, and Lydia insists on smoking in the house. Do sit down, coffee or something stronger." "Coffee, Dolly, and perhaps one of your excellent scones." Miss Marple arranged herself in a chintz armchair and surveyed the company. Valerie Lestrange, Madame Valerie to the Bond Street trade, lounged on the sofa in a scarlet housecoat that would have been arrested for indecency in St. Mary Mead any day but Christmas. Her platinum hair was pinned with a diamond sprig of mistletoe, and her smile was sharp enough to shave with. Lydia Farrar, the actress, sat by the fire painting her nails a shade Miss Marple mentally classified as arterial spray. She wore black velvet and an expression of refined boredom. The American, Jefferson Hogg, stood at the window nursing a glass that was definitely not coffee. He was 60, sun-lamped to the colour of a walnut, and dressed in a checked waistcoat that strained over a stomach earned by a lifetime of expense account lunches. "Miss Marple," he boomed, "Valerie tells me you're the local Sherlock. Ever solve a murder over the teacups?" "Only the murder of good manners, Mr. Hogg." Miss Marple accepted her cup, "though I confess an interest in unusual parcels." Valerie's hand tightened on her cigarette holder. "Jane, darling, must we discuss that nonsense? Some wretched journalist trying to drum up publicity for my boutique? 2 identical parcels to 2 different women hardly seems like publicity," Miss Marple observed mildly. "Unless your boutique is branching out into threats." Lydia gave a brittle laugh. "Darling, in Chelsea we call that marketing. Though I must say, my little box was delivered by hand at 3 in the morning. The porter nearly had kittens." Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. "Enough gloom. We're decorating the tree tonight. Everyone's invited. Mulled wine, carols, the works. Arthur," this to the Colonel, who had just wandered in with a pipe and a guilty expression, "You promised to fetch the fairy lights from the attic." Colonel Bantry grunted. "Can't think why we need 100 fairy lights for one tree. In my day, half a dozen candles did the trick." "And set the curtains alight in 29, his wife reminded him. "Jane, you will come? 8 o'clock sharp." Miss Marple inclined her head. "I should be delighted." The day passed in a flurry of village errands. At the post office, she observed Mr. Drake purchasing stamps with the air of a man who had never queued in his life. At the butcher's, Captain Wainwright, Colonel Bantry's nephew, a sunburned young man with a nervous tic, was ordering a turkey large enough to feed a regiment. And outside the church, the vicar's wife was supervising the erection of a crib whose donkey had lost an ear. By 7 o'clock the sky was indigo and star-pricked. Miss Marple donned her second-best coat, navy blue with a fur collar that had once belonged to a sealskin, and set out for Mead. The snow had stopped, but the cold was vicious. Her breath hung in the air like speech balloons. The great house blazed with light. Every window glowed, and from the open front door spilled the sound of laughter, gramophone music, and the pop of champagne corks. Muswell relieved her of her coat with a bow that would have done credit to Buckingham Palace. The entrance hall had been transformed into a winter forest. A Christmas tree soared to the ceiling, its branches already heavy with ornaments. Ladders leaned against the trunk. Jefferson Hogg was perched halfway up one, swearing amiably as he wrestled with a string of lights. Lydia Farrar reclined on a chaise longue, directing operations with a cocktail glass. Valerie, in emerald silk that matched her eyes, was tying golden bows with theatrical precision. Colonel Bantry pressed a glass of mulled wine into Miss Marple's hand. "Jane, thank God. These women have gone mad for tinsel. Save me," Miss Marple sipped. The wine was excellent, cloves, cinnamon, and a whisper of brandy. "I see you have enlisted the entire village. Half the county, more like." He nodded toward a corner where Captain Wainwright was assisting a blushing maid with a box of glass baubles. Young Wainwright's smitten with our Cherry Baker, though he'll never admit it. And there's Drake, arrived an hour ago, cool as a cucumber. Sebastian Drake stood near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his gaze moving restlessly over the room. When he saw Miss Marple, he gave a slight nod. The tree decoration proceeded with military inefficiency. Ornaments were hung, argued over, rehung. You unturned the gramophone to Bing Crosby, dreaming of a white Christmas. Children, Mrs. Bantry had invited the Sunday school as camouflage for the champagne, darted between legs like minnows. At 9:30, Valerie announced the placement of the star. Jefferson Hogg, slightly unsteady, climbed the ladder again. The star was a spiky confection of silver foil and electric bulbs. As he reached the top, the ladder wobbled alarmingly. "Steady, old man," Colonel Bantry called. Hogg laughed, stretched, and the ladder slipped. For a heartbeat he windmilled. The star clutched to his chest like a shield. Then he fell. He did not fall far, only 6 feet, but he landed squarely on a large gaily wrapped parcel that had been placed beneath the tree for effect. The parcel burst open with a sound like a gunshot. Gold paper shredded. Tinsel exploded in a glittering cloud. And from the wreckage rolled a human head. It was the head of a woman, middle-aged, with neatly waved grey hair and a surprised expression. A crimson ribbon was tied in a bow around the neck, the ends trailing like a macabre scarf. For a moment the room was utterly silent. Then Lydia Farrar screamed, a sound so theatrical it might have been rehearsed. The children began to cry. The gramophone played on, crooning about sleigh bells. Miss Marple moved forward with the calm of a woman stepping over a puddle. She knelt, careful not to disturb the ribbon, and studied the face. "Mrs. Hilda Clement," she said quietly. "Widow of the late station master. Lived alone in Ivy Cottage. Missing since yesterday morning." Colonel Bantry found his voice. "Good God! How? The rest of her," Miss Marple continued, "is almost certainly inside what remains of the parcel. Cherry, take the children to the kitchen. Muswell, telephone Dr. Haydock and Inspector Slack. Tell them to bring a large sheet." Valerie Lestrange had gone the colour of parchment. "It's a joke," she whispered. "A horrible joke." Miss Marple stood. "Jokes, Valerie, do not usually involve decapitation." Sebastian Drake was already at the French windows, checking the locks. "Snow on the terrace, no footprints. Whoever placed the parcel came through the house." Captain Wainwright, white as a sheet, stammered. "We've all been in and out. Servants, guests, carol singers." "Precisely," Miss Marple said, "which makes our task both simpler and infinitely more difficult." Dr. Haydock arrived within 20 minutes, Inspector Slack hard on his heels. The inspector was a large man with a small moustache, and the permanent expression of someone who had smelled a bad drain. He took one look at the scene and bellowed for silence. "Right, nobody leaves this room. Muswell, names and addresses of everyone present. Doctor, cause of death." Haydock, kneeling by the parcel, spoke without looking up. "Severed with a single blow. Sharp blade, probably an axe. Rigor suggests death between 6 and 8 yesterday evening. The head was refrigerated. Note the frost crystals in the hair." Miss Marple murmured, "The butcher's cold store was broken into last night. Mr. Eccles reported it to the constable." Slack swung round. "Miss Marple, I might have known. Meddling again. Observing, Inspector. The ribbon is the same as that used on my parcel this morning. Selfridge's, last year's stock, and the tinsel," she pointed to the glittering wreckage, "is identical to the reel on the sideboard." Valerie gave a strangled cry and fainted with impeccable timing into Jefferson Hogg's arms. Lydia Farrar lit another cigarette with shaking fingers. By midnight, the body had been removed, the guests questioned, the tree stripped of its murderous decoration. Inspector Slack departed with a wagon-load of evidence and a promise to return at dawn. The house party dispersed in shocked silence. Miss Marple walked home through the empty lane. The moon had risen, turning the snow to silver. At her gate she paused, noting fresh footprints leading to her door, and away again, small, neat, a woman's shoe. Inside, on the hall table, lay another parcel. This one was wrapped in black paper, tied with gold tinsel. A tag read, "Third day. The shepherdess has lost her head." Miss Marple carried it to the kitchen, placed it unopened in the larder, and went to bed. But before she slept, she added to her notebook 19th of December, Mead victim d'Acheter 1, Mrs. Hilda Clement 54, widow, no known enemies. M.O. Decapitation, body refrigerated, head presented as gift. Gift says favor to me. Black parcel, unopened observation. Killer has access to Mead, the village, and my cottage. Familiar with nursery rhymes, theatrical, escalating. She underlined the last word twice, turned off the light, and listened to the silence of a village that had just discovered it was no longer safe. Chapter 3. Whispers Under the Mistletoe. The morning of December 20th arrived in a hush of fresh snow. St. Mary Mead lay under a white blanket so thick that even the church spire seemed to have shrunk in modesty. Miss Marple woke before the milkman, her mind already turning over the events of the previous night, like a baker kneading dough. She dressed in her warmest wool, charcoal grey with a discreet brooch of amethyst, and descended to find Cherry staring at the black parcel in the larder, as though it might explode. "Shall I call the police, miss?" Cherry's voice trembled with the thrill of proximity to horror. Not yet. Inspector Slack will be here soon enough, and I prefer my evidence untrampled." Miss Marple poured tea with steady hands. "Tell me, Cherry, did you notice anyone near the cottage after I left for Dane Mead?" Cherry's eyes widened. "Only the postman, miss, and young Tommy Price delivering the parish magazine. Oh, and Mrs. Pork from the Blue Boar, asking if you'd like a turkey raffle ticket." Miss Marple made a mental note. Mrs. Polk's gossip was currency. Her movements were rarely without purpose. At 9 o'clock precisely, Inspector Slack's car skidded to a halt outside. He was accompanied by Sergeant Lake, a lugubrious individual who took notes in a notebook the size of a hymnal. Slack's moustache bristled with official outrage. "Miss Marple, that parcel remains unopened, Inspector. I thought you might prefer to do the honours." She led them to the kitchen. "Though I have taken the liberty of noting that the knot is a double bowline. Sailor's work, or someone who wishes us to think so." Slack grunted, donned gloves and sliced the string. Black paper parted to reveal a wooden box lined with crimson velvet. Nestled inside was a miniature guillotine, exquisitely carved, its blade no longer than a penknife, but wickedly sharp. A card lay beside it. "Third day, off with her head." Cherry squeaked and dropped a teaspoon. Slack's face purpled. "This is harassment. I'll have the yard down here by luncheon, I hope," Miss Marple interrupted smoothly, "though I fear the killer is already among us. The guillotine is yew wood, carved, I suspect, from the old pews removed during the church restoration last spring. Ask the vicar." Sergeant Lake scribbled furiously. The inspector departed with the box and a promise of fingerprints, though Miss Marple doubted the killer was so careless. She herself set out for the village, umbrella furled like a sword. The high street buzzed with suppressed panic. The butcher's shop had a queue despite the early hour. Mrs. Eccles was selling sausages at double speed while whispering that Mrs. Clement had been asking for it, living alone with all that money. At the post office, Miss Weatherby was purchasing stamps and confiding to anyone who would listen that the victim had once accused her cat of stealing cream. Miss Marple paused outside the Blue Boar. Through the window, she could see Sebastian Drake breakfasting alone, a newspaper open but unread. He looked up as she entered, rising with the courtesy of a man who had been taught manners by someone expensive. "Miss Marple, I heard about the parcel. News travels faster than the Royal Mail in St. Mary Mead." She accepted a seat. "Tell me, Mr. Drake, have you received another gift?" He hesitated, then produced from his pocket a small envelope. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, with a sprig of mistletoe tucked beneath the ribbon that bound it. "Kiss your queen goodbye," the back read. "Delivered to my room at dawn," he said, slid under the door. Miss Marple turned the card over. "The ribbon is silk, hand-dyed, I believe. Mrs. Lestrange's boutique, stocks a similar shade." "Curious," Drake's eyes narrowed. "You think Valerie. I think nothing yet. But coincidence is the refuge of the untidy mind." She lowered her voice. Mrs. Clement was not wealthy, despite village gossip. Her husband left debts, not dividends. Who benefits from her death? Before Drake could answer, the door burst open and Captain Wainwright strode in, snow on his shoulders and fury in his eyes. "Drake, I want a word." He noticed Miss Marple and flushed. "Beg pardon, ma'am." "Captain Wainwright," Miss Marple said serenely, "you appear distressed. May I offer you coffee?" He sat heavily. "It's Lydia, Miss Farrar. She's hysterical. Claims someone tried to strangle her with her own scarf in the night. Valerie found her at 3 a.m., wandering the corridor." Drake's expression did not change, but his hand tightened on his cup. "Was she harmed?" "Bruises. Doctor says superficial. but she's packing to leave." Miss Marple sipped her coffee. "And Mrs. Lestrange?" "Valerie's locked herself in her room with a bottle of gin and Mr. Hogg's revolver. The Colonel's beside himself." Outside, the church clock struck 10. Miss Marple rose. "I believe I shall call at Danemead. Captain, might I trouble you for escort? A military man lends respectability." Wainwright, flattered despite himself, offered his arm. The walk to Danemead was brisk. Snow muffled their footsteps. Rooks wheeled overhead like black commas in a white sentence. At the gates, Miss Marple paused to examine the yew tree where she had found the silver ribbon yesterday. Today there was a fresh addition. A tiny noose of red twine dangling from a branch, swaying gently in the breeze. Wainwright swore under his breath. "This is devilish." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed, "though the devil, I suspect, wears familiar shoes." Inside Danemead, chaos reigned. Mrs. Bantry met them in the hall, wringing her hands. "Jane, thank heavens, Lydia's in the drawing-room with sal volatile. Valerie won't come out, and Jefferson Hogg has telephoned his lawyer in London about liability." Miss Marple patted her friend's arm. "Dolly, fetch Lydia's scarf, the one used in the attack, and ask Muswell to bring yesterday's visitor's book." In the drawing-room, Lydia Farrar reclined on a chaise, a lavender-scented handkerchief pressed to her brow. The bruises on her throat were livid against her pale skin. "Miss Marple," she croaked dramatically, "I nearly died. Yet here you are, very much alive." Miss Marple examined the scarf, emerald silk with a pattern of golden reindeer. "This is Mrs. Lestrange's design, is it not? From her boutique." Lydia's eyes flickered. "Valerie lent it to me. Said it brought out my eyes. Curious generosity between rivals." Miss Marple held the scarf to the light. "The weave is damaged here, snagged on something sharp. A brooch, perhaps." Captain Wainwright shifted uncomfortably. "Lydia was wearing my regimental badge last night. I gave it to her for luck." Miss Marple's gaze was kind but inexorable. "Might I see it?" He produced the badge from his pocket. A silver stag rampant. One antler was bent, and caught in the curve was a single green thread. Lydia sat up, handkerchief forgotten. "It was dark. I thought it was Valerie, her perfume." Muswell entered with the visitor's book. Miss Marple flipped to yesterday's page. Among the signatures, Mrs. Hilda Clement, 4:15 p.m., the last entry before the tree decoration. "She came to deliver parish magazines," Mrs. Bantry explained. "I told her to leave them in the library." Miss Marple closed the book. "And was anyone in the library between 4:15 and the discovery of the body?" A silence fell. Then Jefferson Hogg lumbered in, red-faced from the telephone. "Valerie's lawyer says she should make a statement. Something about inheritance." Miss Marple's ears pricked. "Inheritance?" Hogg poured himself a drink. "Hilda Clement was Valerie's godmother. Left her a parcel of land in her will. Worth a pretty penny if the new bypass goes through. Valerie didn't know until yesterday." Captain Wainwright stared. "You mean Mrs. Clement was murdered for a road?" "People have been murdered for less," Miss Marple said quietly, "though I suspect the motive is more personal." She requested permission to see Valerie's room. Mrs. Bantry led her upstairs, chattering nervously. The corridor smelled of gin and jus reviens. Valerie's door was locked. "Valerie, darling, it's Dolly. Miss Marple's here." A pause, then the key turned. Valerie stood in the doorway, eyes swollen, revolver dangling from one hand. "Jane, you'll think me a fool. I think you frightened, which is wiser." Miss Marple stepped inside. The room was a chaos of silk stockings and empty bottles. On the dressing table lay another parcel, this one wrapped in white satin, tied with mistletoe. Valerie followed her gaze. "It was here when I woke. I haven't touched it." Miss Marple donned gloves from her handbag. The parcel contained a tiny silver bell and a card. 4th day. Ring for the Angel of Death. Valerie sank onto the bed. "It's Geoffrey, isn't it? My husband? He's always hated that I kept in touch with Hilda. She knew about before we married." Miss Marple rang the bell. It gave a sweet, sinister chime. "Where is Mr. Lestrange?" "London, or so he says." Valerie's laugh was bitter. Probably with his mistress in Chelsea. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck noon. Miss Marple returned to the drawing-room deep in thought. She found Sebastian Drake had arrived, speaking quietly with Inspector Slack in the library. "Fingerprints on the guillotine," Slack was saying. "Smudged but one clear thumbprint. Matches the partial on Mrs. Clement's magazine." Drake's voice was low. "And the land. Valerie Lestrange inherits. But there's a codicil. If she dies without issue, it reverts to a trust for the village hall." Miss Marple entered. "Which explains the escalation. The killer wishes to frighten Valerie into indiscretion, or worse." Slack rounded on her. "And you know this how?" "Because the mistletoe is freshly cut. From the Mead orchard. Someone was here this morning." She produced the red twine noose from her pocket. "And this was tied with a clove hitch. Another sailor's knot." Drake's eyes met hers. "Captain Wainwright was in the Navy." "Among others," Miss Marple said, "though I suspect our killer is more versatile." The afternoon brought flurries of activity. Inspector Slack interviewed servants. Dr. Haydock confirmed Mrs. Clement had been drugged with chloral hydrate before death, available from any chemist. Miss Geoffrey Lestrange telephoned from London to announce he was catching the next train. At 4 o'clock, the vicar arrived to discuss the carol service, now postponed, out of respect. Miss Marple walked with him to the church, noting the crib's donkey had acquired a scarlet ribbon around its neck. "Someone has a sense of humour," the vicar sighed. "Or a sense of theatre," Miss Marple corrected. Darkness fell early. Miss Marple returned home to find Cherry had laid a cold supper and was stitching a hem with fierce concentration. "Miss, the village is saying it's a madman." "Madmen do not tie perfect bowlines, Cherry." Miss Marple opened her notebook. 20th of December. Mead and village gift after 5 to VL, silver bell, plus death threat. Attempt on LF, strangulation, scarf snagged on Wainwright's badge. Motive, land inheritance, but codicil complicates. Knots, double bowline, clove hitch, nautical. Mistletoe, fresh, local. Observation, killer enjoys an audience. Next move will be public. She was adding a question mark beside Captain Wainwright's name when the doorbell rang. Cherry admitted Sebastian Drake, snow on his shoulders and urgency in his eyes. "Miss Marple, Lydia Farrar has disappeared. Her room is empty, bed unslept in, and this," he held out a sprig of mistletoe tied with the Queen of Spades, "was on her pillow." Miss Marple closed her notebook. "Then we must find her before the 5th day dawns. Cherry, my boots, and the lantern from the shed." Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and relentless. Somewhere in the village, a bell rang, the church practicing for tomorrow's service. Miss Marple stepped into the night, Drake at her side, following footprints that led toward the orchard where the mistletoe grew. Behind them, the cottage lamp burned steady, a small beacon in a village learning the taste of fear. Chapter 4. The Gingerbread Clue. The snow had eased to a gentle sift by the time Miss Marple and Sebastian Drake reached the Mead orchard. But the cold was a living thing. slipping under collars and pinching exposed skin. Their lantern cast a small circle of gold that floated ahead of them like a cautious will-o'-the-wisp. The footprints they followed, small, heeled, frantic, veered off the path and plunged between the apple trees where the snow was deeper and the darkness thicker. "Size 5, Drake murmured, crouching. "Lydia's evening slippers. She can't have gone far in those." Miss Marple's breath plumed white. "Fear lends wings, Mr. Drake, but not insulation. We have perhaps 20 minutes before frostbite." They moved quickly. The orchard smelled of damp bark and frozen fruit. Somewhere an owl questioned the night. The footprints ended abruptly at a low stone wall. Beyond it lay the kitchen garden, its neat beds buried under drifts. On the wall sat a single gingerbread house, no larger than a teapot, its roof iced with real sugar, its door outlined in red piping. A ribbon, crimson familiar, tied a tiny card to the chimney. 5th day. Hansel and Gretel never escaped the oven. Drake's jaw tightened. "She's been taken to the old bakehouse." Miss Marple nodded. The bakehouse, a relic of the estate's self-sufficient days, stood 50 yards away, its chimney long cold. She had played there as a child, hiding in the brick ovens while her nurse despaired. They crossed the garden in silence. The bakehouse door hung ajar. A ribbon of yellow light leaked through the gap. Drake eased it open with his shoulder. Inside the air was warm, shockingly so after the orchard. A paraffin heater glowed in one corner. Lydia Farrar sat bound to a wooden chair in the centre of the flagged floor. Gagged with her own scarf, eyes wide above the emerald silk. Her evening gown was torn at the hem, her feet bare and blue with cold. On the scarred deal table beside her lay a neat row of gingerbread figures, men, women, children, each with a ribbon noose around its neck. Drake moved to free her, but Miss Marple's hand restrained him. "Wait, the floor." The flags were dusted with flour in a deliberate pattern, a perfect circle of footprints leading from the door to the chair. Then away again toward the brick bread oven at the far end. The oven door stood open. Inside, the iron peel leaned like a sentinel. Lydia's muffled whimper broke the silence. Drake cut her bonds with a pocket knife. She tore the gag free and collapsed against him, sobbing. They said the next present would be me, baked like a Christmas goose. Who, Miss Farrar?" Miss Marple's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Who brought you here?" "I don't know." I woke with a hand over my mouth. Chloroform, I think. Then the orchard, the snow. She shuddered. There was a smell of ginger. And a voice whispering, "Sweet dreams, little star." Drake's arm tightened around her. "We need to get her inside." Miss Marple was already examining the gingerbread house. The icing was still tacky. The ribbon matched those on the previous parcels. She lifted the roof carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of crystallized violets, lay a single human finger, severed cleanly at the second joint, nail-painted arterial spray. Lydia screamed and buried her face in Drake's coat. "Mrs. Clements," Miss Marple said quietly, "the finger is refrigerated. Note the frost. Our killer is economical." She turned to the oven. The flour footprints ended at the iron door. Inside, the bricks were warm to the touch, recently fired. On the floor lay a scattering of gingerbread crumbs and a scrap of paper. Miss Marple retrieved it with tweezers from her handbag. She had taken to carrying them since the guillotine. The note was written in red icing. "The oven is ready. Who will be next?" Drake swore under his breath. "This is Escalation. He's taunting us." "Or inviting us to the next performance," Miss Marple corrected. She wrapped the finger in her handkerchief and tucked it into her pocket. "Come." Miss Farrar needs brandy and Dr. Haydock, and we must preserve the scene before Inspector Slack arrives and obliterates it with his boots." They escorted Lydia back to the house. Mrs. Bantry met them in the kitchen, apron askew, eyes round as mince pies. "Jane, what in heaven's name? Brandy, Dolly, and summon the inspector. Miss Farrar has been abducted, but is unharmed, physically at least." While Mrs. Bantry fussed, Miss Marple slipped into the pantry and examined the finger under the light. The cut was surgical, the nail varnish fresh. She noted the faint scent of almonds, cyanide, perhaps. No, marzipan. The killer had iced the gingerbread with almond paste. Inspector Slack arrived with the dawn, accompanied by a photographer and a dog handler whose spaniel sneezed at the flour. The bakehouse yielded little. The heater had been hired from the village ironmonger 2 days ago by a lady in a fur coat. The gingerbread ingredients matched those in Dame Mead's own kitchen. "Servants' day off yesterday," Mrs. Bantry wailed. "Anyone could have walked in." Miss Marple requested the kitchen inventory. The cook, Mrs. Muswell, no relation to the butler, confirmed that a batch of gingerbread dough had vanished from the larder overnight, along with a piping bag and ½ pound of almond paste. "Someone with access to the house," Slack growled. "That narrows it to 50 people. Or someone who knows the servants' routines," Miss Marple said. "Mrs. Muswell, who was on duty yesterday evening." "Only me and the scullery maid, miss. The others went to the pictures in Much Benham." The scullery maid, a spotty girl named Gladys, remembered a tall gentleman in a dark coat, asking for a glass of water around 7 o'clock. Said he was expected, had a London voice. Drake exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. Geoffrey Lestrange had arrived from London at 6:47 p.m. She had seen his signature in the visitor's book. By noon, the house party was under siege. Geoffrey Lestrange, thin, elegant, with the nervous manner of a man who had lost at cards, denied any knowledge of bakehouses or gingerbread. "I was in the billiard room with Hogg until midnight. Ask him." Hogg confirmed, though his eyes slid away when questioned about the land inheritance. Valerie Lestrange remained in her room, sedated by Dr. Haydock. Captain Wainwright had taken to pacing the terrace with a service revolver, muttering about protecting the women. Miss Marple spent the afternoon in the library, ostensibly reading, but actually cataloguing alibis. She noted Geoffrey Lestrange, billiard room 7 to 30 midnight, Hogg, Jefferson Hogg, same, but left briefly at 9:15 for a cigar. Captain Wainwright walked to village pub 8:45, returned merry. Lydia Farrar retired early with a headache, room empty by 2 a.m. Valerie Lestrange sedated from 11 p.m. Sebastian Drake claims walked to Blue Boar 10 p.m., returned 1 a.m. She underlined Drake's name twice. His footprints had not been in the orchard snow. At 4 o'clock, Cherry arrived with a basket of scones and village intelligence. Mrs. Polk says the bakehouse chimney was smoking at 11:30, saw it from her bedroom window. And young Tommy Price found this by the orchard gate. She produced a gingerbread man with a ribbon noose and a tiny sword piped in icing through its heart. Miss Marple turned the figure over. On the back, in red icing, 6th day. The soldier boy marches to war. "Captain Wainwright," Drake said grimly. They found the captain in the gunroom, cleaning a Webley with shaking hands. "I'm not afraid," he insisted, "but if the blighter comes for me—" "He already has," Miss Marple said, showing him the gingerbread. "Though I suspect this is misdirection. The killer enjoys confusing the trail." Wainwright stared at the figure. "My mother used to pipe swords on my birthday biscuits. She was in the WAF, taught me knots too." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Your mother lives in the village. Rose Cottage, but she's bedridden, stroke last year." They went to Rose Cottage under pretence of Christmas charity. Mrs. Wainwright Sr. lay propped on pillows, eyes bright in a wasted face. On her bedside table stood a plate of gingerbread men, identical to those in the bakehouse, swords and all. "I baked them yesterday," she whispered. "My nurse helps with the oven, for the Sunday school." The nurse, Miss Hartnell, a sturdy woman with a sailor's tattoo peeking from her sleeve, was fetching tea. Miss Marple noted the double bowline knot in her apron strings. Back at Mead, the house settled into uneasy quiet. Dinner was a sombre affair, the turkey untouched, the crackers unpulled. Lydia Farrar, wrapped in shawls, drank brandy and stared at the fire. Valerie appeared briefly, pale but composed, to announce she was leaving for London in the morning. "You'll do no such thing," Inspector Slack barked. "Nobody leaves until I say." Miss Marple retired early, pleading fatigue. In her room, Mrs. Bantry had insisted she stay the night. She opened her notebook. 21 December, Mead Bakehouse victim number 1, finger in gingerbread house. Abduction of LF, staged, non-lethal. Gingerbread sauce, Mead kitchen plus, Mrs. Wainwright. Nurse Hartnell, sailor's knots, access to oven. Motive matrix, land VL inherits, reverts to village if she dies. Jealousy, LF and VL rivals for GL. Revenge, Mrs. Clement new secret. Observation, killer needs audience. Next murder will be spectacular. She was adding a question mark beside Nurse Hartnell when a soft knock sounded. Sebastian Drake slipped inside, closing the door behind him. "I've been watching the orchard," he whispered. "Someone's been back, fresh footprints to the bakehouse, and this," he held out a gingerbread star, iced with a tiny guillotine. "Left on the windowsill of the gunroom." Miss Marple turned the star over. On the back, midnight. The curtain rises. She glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. "Quickly," she said. "We have 13 minutes." They descended the back stairs, avoiding the creaking third step. The house was silent. Even the clocks seemed to hold their breath. Outside, the snow had stopped. The moon hung low and gibbous, turning the world to platinum. The bakehouse door stood open again. Inside, the paraffin heater glowed. On the table lay a fresh gingerbread house. This one larger, its roof peaked like a church. The door was piped in black icing. Above it, in red, the final performance. Drake reached for the roof, but Miss Marple stopped him. "Listen." From the bread oven came a faint scratching sound, rhythmic, deliberate. Drake wrenched open the iron door. Inside, bound and gagged, lay Captain Wainwright. His uniform was streaked with flour. His eyes blazed with fury above the gag. Around his neck was a ribbon noose, tied with a perfect hangman's knot. Drake cut him free. Wainwright spat out the gag. A gingerbread man with a sword through its heart. "They said it was my turn to be baked," he gasped. "Who?" Miss Marple demanded. "Didn't see dark smell of almonds." The heater flickered. On the wall someone had piped in icing. "The soldier boy survived." But the curtain falls at dawn. Miss Marple looked at the gingerbread house. Carefully she lifted the roof. Inside, on a bed of marzipan, lay a tiny coffin made of gingerbread. The lid was iced with a single word: Valerie. The church clock began to strike 12. Somewhere in the house, a woman screamed. Miss Marple closed the roof with steady fingers. "The 6th day is not yet over," she said, "but the 7th dawns with blood." Chapter 5. Carolers in the Snow. The scream that tore through Mead at the stroke of midnight was not theatrical. It was raw, animal, the sound a throat makes when it believes death has already arrived. Miss Marple, Drake, and the flour-dusted Captain Wainwright ran towards the house, boots skidding on packed snow. The kitchen door stood open. A rectangle of yellow light spilled across the terrace like spilled butter. Mrs. Bantry met them in the scullery, face blanched, hands pressed to her mouth. "It's Valerie, upstairs, the blue bedroom." They took the servants' stair 2 at a time. The corridor above was chaos. Doors flung wide, guests in dressing gowns, Jefferson Hogg bellowing for his revolver. Lydia Farrar stood outside the blue bedroom, arms wrapped around herself as though holding her ribs in place. "She opened the door," Lydia whispered. "I heard her laugh, then nothing." Miss Marple entered first. Valerie Lestrange lay on the rug before the fireplace, emerald silk nightgown rucked to her thighs, one arm flung out as if reaching for the poker. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling roses. A ribbon, scarlet this time, encircled her throat in a perfect bow. Beneath the bow, the skin was unmarked. On the hearthstone beside her lay a sprig of holly and a card. 6th day. Silent night. Dr. Haydock pushed through the crowd, knelt, pressed fingers to the carotid. "Dead. Less than 5 minutes. Cyanide. Smell the almonds." Sebastian Drake's voice cut through the murmurs. "The window." The casement stood ajar 6 inches. Snow had drifted onto the sill in a small white fan. Drake leaned out. "No footprints below. Snow's undisturbed. Ladder." "None visible," Miss Marple said. She was already examining the ribbon. Silk, hand-dyed, identical to the scarf used on Miss Farrar. And the bow, she demonstrated with deft fingers, is a highwayman's knot. Quick to tie, quicker to release. Our killer expected interruption. Inspector Slack arrived with the dawn, which was still 2 hours away. He sealed the room, posted a constable, and herded the household into the drawing-room. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, stripped of its fatal parcel, but still glittering with tinsel like a widow in sequins. Slack's moustache bristled. "Right, times. Nobody moves until I have a statement." Miss Marple slipped away to the kitchen, where Mrs. Muswell was brewing tea strong enough to wake the dead. "The carolers," she said without preamble. "Who were they?" Mrs. Muswell blinked. "Village choir, miss. Came at 11:30 like always. Colonel gave them cocoa and a collection for the orphanage. Left just before midnight." "How many?" 12. Though Mr. Polk from the Blue Boar joined late. Said he'd been delayed at the pub. Miss Marple nodded. "And the route?" "Up the drive, round the terrace, then to the church for midnight practice." She returned to the drawing-room. The suspects sat in a loose circle. Geoffrey Lestrange chain-smoking Turkish, cigarettes. Jefferson Hogg nursing a brandy. Lydia Farrar wrapped in a blanket. Captain Wainwright still flour-streaked and shaking. Drake leaning against the mantelpiece, eyes unreadable. Slack was interrogating Geoffrey. "You say you were asleep? Dead to the world? Valerie gave me a sleeping draught. Nerves, you know." His hand trembled as he stubbed out the cigarette. Miss Marple murmured to Drake, "The draught? Where is the bottle?" "Bedside table. Empty." She crossed to Slack. "Inspector, might I see Mrs. Lestrange's room again, alone?" Slack hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes." The blue bedroom smelled of cyanide and Gilles Revian. Miss Marple closed the door, opened her handbag, and took out a small torch. She examined the window first. The catch was stiff with disuse. The snow on the sill undisturbed except for a single fingerprint in the drift. Small, gloved. She photographed it mentally. On the dressing table, the empty sleeping draught bottle, a glass with dregs, a lipstick smudged with scarlet. She lifted the glass to her nose. Bitter almonds beneath the lavender water. On the blotter, a faint impression. Meet me terrace, 11:45 urgent. V. The terrace. The carolers had been on the terrace. She opened the wardrobe. Valerie's fur coat hung neatly. The pockets held a handkerchief and a theatre ticket stub, the mousetrap dated last week. On the floor, half hidden beneath the hem, lay a gingerbread star, iced with a tiny noose. Miss Marple pocketed it and returned downstairs. The drawing-room had grown quieter, shock giving way to suspicion. Captain Wainwright was describing his ordeal in the bakehouse for the third time. Lydia Farrar stared at Valerie's husband as though seeing him for the first time. Miss Marple took a seat near the fire. Inspector, the carolers sang beneath Mrs. Lestrange's window at approximately 11:42. Mrs. Muswell heard them. At 11:45, someone lured Valerie to the terrace with a note. She went down the back stairs, barefoot, in her nightgown, which suggests urgency or trust. The killer met her, offered the poison draught as something to warm you, and returned upstairs before the song ended. Slack frowned, but the window was opened from inside after death, to suggest escape. The fingerprint is a flourish. She produced the gingerbread star. Found in the wardrobe. Our killer plants clues like breadcrumbs. Geoffrey Lestrange laughed, a cracked sound. You're saying one of the carolers murdered my wife? I'm saying the killer wore a carol sheet as disguise. Mr. Polk joined late. Convenient timing. She turned to Mrs. Bantry. Dolly, the collection tin. Who held it? Mr. Polk. He always does. Miss Marple nodded, and the route took them past the kitchen door. Easy to slip away, administer the poison, return before the final verse. Drake spoke for the first time. But Valerie was alive when the carolers left. Mrs. Muswell saw her wave from the window at 11:55. Exactly, Miss Marple said. The cyanide was in the sleeping draught she took later. The terrace meeting was to deliver the bottle, already poisoned. Inspector Slack rubbed his temples. So, we're looking for someone who knew her habits, had access to cyanide, and could mimic her handwriting. Cyanide, Miss Marple repeated. Used in photography. Mr. Hogg, you mentioned moving pictures. Hogg started. Darkroom chemicals, yes, but I haven't touched a camera in years. Yet your luggage was searched yesterday, Drake said. A bottle of potassium cyanide was found, labelled rat poison. Hogg's face purpled. That's absurd. I keep it for developing film, Miss Marple finished. In 1928, hardly current. The room held its breath. Hogg slumped. Valerie asked me to bring it. Said she had headaches, wanted something stronger than aspirin. I thought nothing of it. Miss Marple's gaze moved to the Christmas tree. The ribbons on the parcels match those on the carol sheets. Crimson silk, village made. Mrs. Polk sews them every year. Slack stood. Polk, where is he? At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Bantry said. Drunk as a lord since 11. They found Mr. Polk in the pub snore, face down in a puddle of ale, a carol sheet clutched in one fist. On the sheet, in red ink, Silent Night, Holy Terror. But Polk was not the killer. His boots were dry, his hands smelled of beer, not almonds. And in his pocket was a gingerbread angel, with a cracked halo and a note, You sang too soon. Miss Marple returned to Mead as the sky paled to pearl. The household had dispersed to exhausted sleep. She sat in the morning room with her notebook. 23rd of December, Mead victim number 2, Valerie Lestrange, cyanide in sleeping draught. M.O., poisoned bottle delivered during Carolers' visit. Carolers, 12 Plaza Polk, late. Cyanide, Hogg's bottle, requested by VL. Note forgery, killer knew VL's handwriting. Gingerbread angel, misdirection, observation, killer enjoys music. Next murder during a performance. She was adding a question mark beside Lydia Farrar's name when the doorbell rang. Cherry stood on the step, breathless, clutching a parcel wrapped in white paper tied with holly. Found on the church porch, miss. Addressed to the vicar, but he's gone to Much Benham for communion wine. Miss Marple took the parcel. It was heavier than expected. The tag read, 7th day. The angel choir sings at dawn. She carried it to the kitchen, opened it with Cherry hovering. Inside, a tiny music box. She wound the key. It played the first bars of Hark. The herald angels sing, then stopped. The lid sprang open. A gingerbread angel lay inside, wings broken, head severed. Beneath it, a card, Midnight Mass. The choir will be one short. Cherry crossed herself. The carol service, it's tonight. Miss Marple closed the box. Then we have 12 hours to prevent a third murder. Cherry, fetch my black coat and the lantern. We are going to church. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and relentless, erasing footprints as quickly as they were made. In the distance, the church bell tolled once, a warning or an invitation. Miss Marple stepped into the storm, the music box tucked safely in her pocket. Somewhere in the village, a killer was rehearsing the final verse. Chapter 6. The Stocking Stuffed with Lies. The church of St. Mary Mead stood at the end of a lane that had been ploughed once and then abandoned to the snow. By 6 o'clock on the evening of December 23rd, the sky was the colour of tarnished pewter, and the wind had teeth. Miss Marple arrived early, her black coat buttoned to the chin, a wool scarf wound twice around her neck, and the music box from the morning parcel tucked into her handbag like contraband. Cherry had begged to accompany her. Miss Marple had refused. One witness was enough to risk. Inside, the church smelled of damp stone, candle wax, and the particular resinous sweetness of Christmas greenery. Garlands of holly and ivy looped the pillars. The crib in the side chapel glowed with the soft light of a dozen nightlights. The choir, 6 women, 4 men, and 3 nervous boys, was already assembling in the chancel, hymn sheets trembling in gloved hands. The vicar, the Reverend Leonard Clement, no relation to the late Hilda, fluttered among them like a moth in a cassock. Miss Marple, a blessing. We're 1 soprano short. Mrs. Price has the influenza. Could you possibly— I fear my voice is more suited to the congregation, vicar, but I shall sit near the front and observe. She took a pew on the gospel side, close enough to see faces, far enough to avoid the draught from the south door. Inspector Slack had stationed 2 constables at the entrances, one in uniform, one in plain clothes pretending to be a sidesman. Sebastian Drake lounged in the shadows of the Lady Chapel, overcoat unbuttoned, eyes never still. Captain Wainwright had insisted on patrolling the churchyard with his service revolver. Miss Marple had dissuaded him only by promising that the killer preferred an audience to a shootout. At 7:30, the congregation began to arrive. Villagers in Sunday best, Danemid servants in a nervous knot, the house party guests looking as though they had dressed for a funeral rather than a carol service. Jefferson Hogg filled an entire pew with his bulk and a flask of brandy. Lydia Farrar, veiled in black lace, sat between Colonel and Mrs. Bantry. Geoffrey Lestrange was absent, confined to Danemead under Slack's orders, ostensibly for his own safety. Nurse Hartnell from Rose Cottage slipped in late, cheeks red from the cold, and took a seat near the font. The organist struck up once in Royal David City. The choir processed. Miss Marple counted heads, 12, as advertised. Mr. Pork, sober for once, stood at the back with the collection plate. The service began. Halfway through the second lesson, and there were shepherds abiding in the field, the south door creaked. A gust of wind swept snow across the flagstones. A figure entered, muffled in a dark coat and scarf, face obscured by a fur hood. The congregation turned. The vicar faltered mid-sentence. The newcomer slid into the rearmost pew and bowed her head. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The coat was Valerie Lestrange's sable. Valerie, who lay in the mortuary at Much Benham. The scarf was emerald silk. The height was wrong, too short, but the posture was perfect mimicry. Drake moved silently along the side aisle. Slack's plainclothes man shifted nearer the door. The lesson ended. The choir rose, for wild shepherds watched. The hooded figure joined them, voice muffled but audible, a clear, sweet soprano, Mrs. Price's part. Miss Marple opened her handbag and removed the music box. She wound the key once, the first notes of hark. The herald angels sing floated out, tinny but unmistakable. The hooded singer faltered, missed a beat, recovered. The congregation noticed nothing. The choir pressed on. At the end of the hymn, the vicar announced the anthem, in the bleak midwinter. The organ swelled. The hooded figure stepped forward to take the solo verse. Drake was already moving. The soloist lifted her head. The fur hood fell back, revealing not Valerie Lestrange, but Gladys, the scullery maid from Mead, eyes wide with terror, mouth painted scarlet. Around her neck was a crimson ribbon tied in a perfect bow. She opened her mouth to sing, and collapsed. The church erupted. Women screamed, men surged forward. Drake caught Gladys before she hit the stone. Miss Marple was beside him in an instant, fingers at the girl's throat. Pulse strong, chloroform, smell it on the scarf. She unwound the ribbon. Beneath it, the skin was unmarked. Staged again, she's bait! Slack bellowed for order. The congregation milled like sheep. In the confusion, Miss Marple saw Nurse Hartnell slip out the north door. Drake, the nurse! They ran. The north door led to the vestry. Snow had drifted against it. Fresh prints, small, heeled, led round to the churchyard. The wind whipped the scarf from Miss Marple's neck. She did not pause to retrieve it. The churchyard was a maze of white mounds and leaning stones. The footprints ended at the lich gate, where a dark figure wrestled with something in the snow. Nurse Hartnell, coat unbuttoned, was dragging a large Hessian sack toward the lane. Drake tackled her. She fought like a wildcat, surprisingly strong, until Slack's constable arrived and snapped on handcuffs. The sack twitched. Miss Marple knelt, loosened the neck. Inside, bound and gagged with holly leaves, was Geoffrey Lestrange. His eyes rolled white above the gag. A ribbon noose circled his throat. Alive, Drake said grimly. Barely. They carried him inside. Dr. Haydock, summoned from the congregation, administered ammonia. Geoffrey coughed, retched, and began to babble. Valerie said meet me churchyard, 11 o'clock, then the scarf, chloroform. Miss Marple examined the noose. Highwayman's knot again, and the holly leaves are from the altar garland, cut this afternoon. Slack turned to Nurse Hartnell. Name? Hartnell. Enid Hartnell. I've done nothing. Then why abduct Mr. Lestrange? I didn't. I found him, thought to help. Miss Marple's voice cut through. You found him with a sack over his head and dragged him toward the lane. Curious definition of help. The nurse's face crumpled. It was a game. Valerie's idea. She said Geoffrey liked charades. We were to scare him, teach him a lesson for his philandering. Gladys agreed to wear the coat. I never meant Valerie is dead, Slack said flatly. Enid Hartnell stared. No, that's impossible. She telephoned me at 6, said meet in the churchyard, bring the sack from the potting shed. Miss Marple and Drake exchanged glances. Valerie had been dead since midnight. The service had dissolved into pandemonium. The vicar was administering brandy to the choir. Mrs. Bantry was organising tea in the parish hall. Miss Marple gathered the principals in the vestry. Slack, Drake, Haydock, Geoffrey, wrapped in a cassock and shaking, and Enid Hartnell in cuffs. "Timeline," Miss Marple said crisply. "Valerie dies between 11:55 and 12:05. Body discovered 12 through. At 6 was PM, someone impersonating Valerie telephones Nurse Hartnell. Gladys is persuaded to wear the sable coat. Why? Gladys, revived with sal volatile, sniffled. A lady rang the kitchen, said she was Mrs. Lestrange, wanted me to play a prank on Mr. Geoffrey, gave me a £1 note. Description of the voice? Posh, like Miss Farrar on the wireless. Lydia Farrar, summoned from the hall, denied everything with theatrical indignation. I was rehearsing Macbeth in the mirror at 6. Ask Colonel Bantry. Colonel Bantry confirmed, somewhat sheepishly. Miss Marple turned to Enid Hartnell. You have access to chloral hydrate, Mrs. Wainwright's prescription. For her nerves, Enid said defiantly. Doctor's orders. And the sailor's knots? My brother was in the merchant navy. Taught me when we were children. Slack rubbed his temples. So we have a dead woman making telephone calls, a scullery maid in sable, and a nurse playing kidnapper. Where's the murderer? Miss Marple opened her handbag and removed the music box. Here. The killer communicates through gifts. This morning's parcel was meant for the vicar, left on the porch because the killer knew he would be at evensong. The music box plays the anthem tune. The severed gingerbread angel was inside. The message, the choir would be one short. Gladys took Mrs. Price's place. She wound the key again. The tune played, then stopped. The lid sprang open. This time, the gingerbread angel was whole, but its wings were iced with tiny words. The stocking is full. Hang it by the fire. Slack stared. Another threat. A signature, Miss Marple said. The killer is telling us the game continues. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. The stocking is the final gift. Geoffrey Lestrange found his voice. Valerie's stocking. She always hung it on the mantel in our room. Said it was tradition from her orphanage days. Miss Marple nodded. Then we know where the next scene will be played. Inspector, I suggest you search every stocking in Mead and place a guard on the chimney. The vestry clock struck 9. Outside, the snow had stopped. The churchyard lay pristine under starlight. Miss Marple stepped into the cold, Drake at her side. One more thing, she said. The telephone call at 6. Exchange records will show the origin, but I suspect it came from within Mead itself. Drake's breath smoked. Someone who knew Valerie's voice well enough to mimic it. Or someone who had a recording. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Mr. Hogg mentioned moving pictures. Sound film requires synchronization. A clever editor could isolate a phrase. They walked back to Mead in silence. The great house loomed dark against the sky, its chimneys plumed with smoke. In the hall, the Christmas tree lights had been turned off. Only the fire glowed. On the mantelpiece hung a single red stocking, bulging ominously. Slack's men were already there, photographing, measuring. The stocking was stitched from velvet, embroidered with VL in gold thread. Miss Marple approached cautiously. Careful, Drake warned. Could be wired. She snipped the thread with nail scissors. The stocking sagged. From the toe rolled a cascade of gingerbread stars, each iced with a tiny noose. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue, lay a small reel of film and a note. Christmas Eve. The picture's at midnight. Bring popcorn. Miss Marple turned the reel in her fingers. 16mm, Mr. Hogg's camera. Hogg, summoned from his brandy, blustered. Borrowed it yesterday, said he wanted to film the carol service for Valerie's Christmas present. Gave it back this morning. Who borrowed it? Captain Wainwright. The captain was found in the gun room, polishing his revolver with obsessive care. He denied everything. Borrowed the camera for 5 minutes, thought I'd take a snap of the tree. Film was blank. Miss Marple opened her notebook under the library lamp. 23rd December. Church and Dane Mead victim number 2 confirmed, VL cyanide. Abduction number 1, Gladys, staged, abduction number 2, GL, staged by EH. Telephone impersonation, recorded voice. Film reel, from Hogg via Wainwright. Stocking, contained gingerbread plus reel. Observation, killer films his crimes, final act tomorrow night. She underlined the last line 3 times. At 11 o'clock, the house settled into uneasy quiet. Miss Marple accepted Mrs. Bantry's offer of a bedroom, 3rd door on the left, with a view of the terrace. She did not undress. Instead, she sat by the window, knitting scarf after scarf for the missionaries, her ears tuned to every creak. At 11:47, the terrace door opened. A figure in dark clothing slipped out, carrying something bulky. Miss Marple watched it cross the snow toward the old stables, now converted to a cinema room for Hogg's private screenings. She slipped downstairs, collected Drake from the library where he pretended to read and followed. The cinema room smelled of velvet and cigarette smoke. A projector stood on a table, threaded with the reel from the stocking. The screen flickered to life. Grainy images. Valerie Lestrange laughing in the orchard, unaware of the camera. Valerie waving from her window during the carolers. Valerie on the terrace, drinking from a small bottle. Valerie collapsing. The camera lingered on her face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then a new scene. The bakehouse. Lydia Farrar bound to the chair. Captain Wainwright in the oven. Gladys in the sable coat entering the church. The film ended with a close-up of a gingerbread house. The roof lifted. Inside, a tiny camera lens winking. The screen went black. A single line appeared in white letters. Merry Christmas! The end is nigh. Drake swore. He filmed everything, from inside the parcels. Miss Marple nodded. Miniature camera, hidden in the gingerbread. The reel was the invitation to watch his masterpiece. They searched the room. Behind the screen, a door led to the old projection booth. Inside, editing equipment, cans of film, a spool labelled Master. And on the table, a Christmas stocking, smaller, child-sized, stuffed with gingerbread figures. Each figure had a face. Mrs. Clement, Valerie, Geoffrey, Lydia, Gladys. The last figure was blank. A note pinned to the stocking. One more gift. Dawn on Christmas Day. Miss Marple closed her eyes. The blank figure is the killer. He has not yet chosen his final victim, or wishes us to believe so. Drake's voice was grim. Or the final victim is the one who survives to tell the tale. Outside, the church clock struck 12. Christmas Eve had begun. Chapter 7. Midnight Mass. Mayhem. Christmas Eve arrived in a hush of iron-cold air, and the smell of snow that had forgotten how to fall. Dane Mead woke under martial law. 2 constables at the front, 1 at the back, Inspector Slack prowling the corridors with the expression of a man who had swallowed a wasp. Every chimney had been swept, every stocking searched, every parcel sniffed by a police dog that sneezed at marzipan and sat down in protest. The house party guests were confined to the morning room, where Mrs. Bantry dispensed coffee and sympathy in equal measure. Miss Marple sat by the window, knitting needles clicking like a metronome. She had not slept. Her notebook lay open on the table, beside a cooling cup of tea. 24. December. Danemed film reel, killer's confession in celluloid. Stocking thou stood 2, 5 victims, +1 blank, MO evolution, from decapitation, poison, staged abductions, filmed spectacle. Next act, midnight mass, public, liturgical, symbolic, prediction. The blank gingerbread is the killer's self-portrait. He will appear as victim to be unmasked at the altar. She underlined the last line and closed the book. At 10 o'clock, the vicar telephoned in a panic. The midnight mass was to proceed. Tradition, the bishop's insistence, the orphanage collection. But the choir was down to 4 trebles and a bass with laryngitis. Could Dane Mead lend voices? Mrs. Bantry volunteered Lydia Farrar, she sang at the Palladium, and Captain Wainwright, Harrow Chapel, decent baritone. Jefferson Hogg offered to read the lesson in his best Hollywood baritone. Geoffrey Lestrange, pale and shaking, asked to attend as a penitent. Nurse Hartnell, released on police bail, begged to accompany Mrs. Wainwright in her wheelchair, for the old lady's sake. Slack agreed, on condition that every participant be searched and escorted. Miss Marple requested a seat in the organ loft. My rheumatism, you understand. Slack, suspecting nothing, granted it. By 11:30 the church was filling. Villagers stamped snow from boots. Children clutched lanterns made from turnips. The Cribbs donkey had acquired a tiny red ribbon around its neck, someone's idea of festive. The police dog sat by the font, tail thumping. Miss Marple climbed the narrow spiral to the loft. The organist, Mr. Finch, greeted her with relief. "Thank heaven! The bellows boy has measles. Could you pump?" She took her place at the manual bellows, hidden behind the pipes. From here she could see the entire nave. Slack by the south door, Drake in the Lady Chapel, Wainwright in the choir stalls polishing his regimental badge. Lydia Farrar, veiled again, sat in the front pew with Hogg. Geoffrey Lestrange knelt at the communion rail, head bowed. Nurse Hartnell wheeled Mrs. Wainwright into the side aisle. The old lady clutched a gingerbread star like a rosary. At 11:55 the organ began the prelude, in dulci jubilo. The congregation rose, the choir processed. 4 trebles, Lydia, Wainwright, Mr. Polk, still sober, and unexpectedly Gladys the scullery maid, promoted to soprano and trembling in a borrowed cassock. The vicar ascended the pulpit. Dearly beloved, on this holy night. The lights failed. Not a flicker, total darkness, as though someone had snuffed every candle with one breath. A collective gasp rose. Then a single spotlight, borrowed from Hogg's cinema equipment, snapped on, illuminating the high altar. On the altar cloth lay a body. It was robed in white, arms outstretched, a crown of holly on the head. The face was obscured by a gingerbread mask, blank, featureless, iced with a tiny noose. A crimson ribbon bound the wrists. Another circled the poo, throat. From the mask's mouth protruded a silver spoon. The spotlight held for 3 heartbeats. Then the lights blazed back. Chaos. Women screamed. Men shouted. The police dog barked itself hoarse. Slack bellowed for order. Drake vaulted the communion rail. Miss Marple abandoned the bellows and descended the stairs at a speed that would have shamed a woman half her age. The body was not a body. It was a tailor's dummy, stolen from Valerie Lestrange's London boutique, dressed in an alb and stole. The gingerbread mask was fresh, the icing still tacky. The spoon was engraved, "Stir the plum pudding." Drake ripped the mask free. Beneath it, pinned to the dummy's chest, was a reel of film and a card. 7th day. The final course is served. Slack's face was purple. "Search the church, every pew, every crypt." Miss Marple knelt by the altar. The ribbon around the throat was silk, hand-dyed emerald, the same as Lydia's scarf, Valerie's boutique. She sniffed the gingerbread, almonds, cyanide. The spoon was from Danemead silver, monogrammed B for Bantry. The congregation was being herded into the parish hall for statements. Miss Marple slipped away to the vestry. The projection equipment was still there, wired to a timer. She followed the cable. It led through a mouse hole to the crypt beneath. The crypt was lit by a single candle. On the stone floor lay another stocking, this one black velvet, bulging. A tag for the old lady. Open at once. She opened it. Inside, a miniature plum pudding, iced with marzipan holly. Embedded in the top was a silver sixpence, and a human finger, the nail-painted arterial spray. Lydia Farrar's finger, severed at the second joint. A note in red icing. "The pudding is poisoned. Who will take the first bite?" Miss Marple wrapped the pudding in her handkerchief and climbed back to the nave. The church was nearly empty. Only Slack, Drake, and the vicar remained. "Lydia Farrar is missing," Drake said grimly. "Her veil is on the pew, but no sign of her." Slack took the pudding, face grim, cyanide again, and the finger fresh. Miss Marple's voice was steady. "The killer has escalated to mutilation. The dummy was a dress rehearsal. The real victim is Lydia. The pudding is the invitation to Christmas dinner, tomorrow at Mead." The vicar wrung his hands. "But the orphanage children, they're coming for lunch." "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "The killer wants an audience of innocence. Inspector, I suggest you cancel the dinner." Slack shook his head. "Can't. The bishop's orders. Charity must proceed. We'll guard every spoon." Miss Marple returned to Mead in the police car. The house was ablaze with light. Every window glowed like a jack-o'-lantern. In the hall, the Christmas tree had been redecorated. Someone had hung tiny gingerbread figures from every branch, each with a noose. Mrs. Bantry met her, eyes red. "Jane, they've taken Lydia. And Geoffrey. He's locked himself in the wine cellar with a bottle of port and Mr. Hogg's revolver." Miss Marple went to the wine cellar. Geoffrey sat on an upturned crate, revolver across his knees, port bottle half empty. "She's dead, isn't she?" he said without looking up. "Valerie, Lydia, all of them." "Not yet," Miss Marple said, "but she will be unless we find her before dawn." He laughed bitterly. "I loved them both, you know. Valerie for her fire, Lydia for her fragility. I'm the common denominator." Miss Marple sat beside him. "Tell me about the land." He blinked. "What land?" "The parcel Mrs. Clement left Valerie, the bypass." His face cleared. "Oh, that. Valerie was going to sell to the council. I advised against it. Said the village needed the meadow." She laughed. "Said meadows were for cows, not couture." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Who else knew?" "Everyone. It was in the local paper." She stood. "Then the motive is not greed. It is theatre. The killer wants the village to watch its traditions destroyed." Upstairs, the household gathered in the drawing room. Captain Wainwright had drawn a plan of the estate on the back of a menu. Nurse Hartnell was brewing cocoa for Mrs. Wainwright. Jefferson Hogg was developing photographs in the darkroom. Evidence, he claimed. Miss Marple addressed them. "The killer has Lydia. The pudding is the clue. Plum pudding is served flaming, with brandy butter. The flame is the signal. We must watch every fire in the house." Slack posted men at every fireplace. The great Yule log in the hall was banked low. The kitchen range glowed. The nursery fireplace, long disused, was sealed with boards. At 3 a.m., the house slept fitfully. Miss Marple sat in the library with Drake and her notebook. 24:25 for December, midnight mass. Victim number 3, attempted, dummy on altar. Victim number 4, LF missing, finger in pudding. Pudding, cyanide, silver sixpence, tradition, fire motif, flaming pudding. Chukra signal. Observation. Killer needs blue flame. Methylated spirits. Check the still room. They found the still room door ajar. Inside, shelves of preserves gleamed. On the table, a bowl of brandy butter, a bottle of methylated spirits, and a gingerbread house. The roof lifted to reveal a tiny camera, still filming. Drake smashed it. "He's watching us!" Miss Marple examined the brandy butter. "Almond essence covers the cyanide. The sixpence is a red herring." A scream from the nursery. They ran. The nursery door was open, the boards pried from the fireplace. Inside, Lydia Farrar lay on the hearthrug, bound with ribbon, a gingerbread mask over her face. Her left hand was bandaged. The severed finger lay beside her like a macabre ornament. A pudding basin stood on the mantel, flaming blue. Drake extinguished the flame. Miss Marple removed the mask. Lydia was alive, eyes wide with terror, mouth gagged with holly. "She's drugged," Drake said. "Chloroform again." Miss Marple untied the ribbons. "The knot is a reef knot, simple, child's play. The killer is running out of time." Lydia's whisper was barely audible. "He said the children must see." Slack arrived with reinforcements. Lydia was carried to a bedroom. Dr. Haydock summoned. The pudding was seized, cyanide in the brandy butter, enough to kill a dozen. Miss Marple stood in the nursery, staring at the cold hearth. "The children arrive at noon. The killer will strike then. We have 9 hours." She opened her notebook to a fresh page. Final act, Christmas dinner. Audience, orphans. Weapon, poisoned pudding. Killer's mistake, the blue flame. Only one person in the house distills spirits, Mr. Hogg. Dawn broke grey and sullen. The orphans would arrive at 11. The pudding was in police custody. But Miss Marple knew the killer had a second course. She found Jefferson Hogg in the darkroom, developing the last reel. "Mr. Hogg," she said quietly, "the film in the gingerbread house. Where is the master copy?" He did not turn. "Burned. Evidence destroyed." She stepped closer. "You filmed Valerie's death. You staged the abductions. You severed Lydia's finger to heighten the drama, but you made one mistake." He faced her, eyes red. "What mistake?" "The sixpence. Tradition says the finder gets good luck. You put it in the pudding for the children, but the pudding was never meant to be eaten. You wanted the spectacle of fear, not mass murder." Hogg laughed a broken sound. "You think I'm the killer? I think you are the director. But every director needs a star." She opened the darkroom door. Drake stood there with Slack. "The master reel," Miss Marple said, "is in the projector in the cinema room, labelled Christmas Surprise. It shows the killer's face." Hogg lunged for the shelves. Drake restrained him. Slack snapped on cuffs. In the cinema room, the projector whirred. The screen flickered. Valerie on the terrace, Lydia in the bakehouse. Then a new scene. The nursery fireplace. A figure in black, face masked, slicing the pudding. The mask slipped. Captain Wainwright's face stared out, eyes wild. The film ended with a gingerbread star iced with a single word, curtain. Wainwright was found in the gunroom, revolver to his temple. Drake disarmed him. He did not resist. "It was for the regiment," he whispered. "Valerie laughed at me, said I was a joke in uniform. Lydia pitied me. I wanted them to fear me." Miss Marple stood in the doorway. "You filmed your own crimes. You hid the camera in the gingerbread. You used Hogg's equipment because he taught you in the officers' mess. Amateur dramatics." Wainwright nodded. "The land was a blind. I wanted the village to remember me." Slack led him away. The orphans arrived at noon, unaware of the drama. Mrs. Bantry served jelly and ice cream instead of pudding. The police dog ate the sixpence and wagged its tail. Miss Marple walked home through the melting snow. At her gate, a final parcel waited, small, wrapped in gold, tied with a crimson bow. Inside, a gingerbread house, intact, the roof lifted to reveal a tiny mirror. On the mirror, in icing, you were the star. She smiled, closed the roof, and went inside to brew tea. Chapter 8. The Pudding's Poisoned Core. The morning of Christmas Day dawned with a pale, reluctant sun that turned the snow to slush, and the village lane to a ribbon of mud. St. Mary Mead stirred slowly, as though the events of the night had left a bruise on its collective soul. Church bells rang for the 8 o'clock service, but the pews were half empty. Fear lingered like incense. Miss Marple attended, sang the hymns in her reedy soprano, and accepted a mince pie from the vicar's wife, with the serene politeness of a woman who had not just unmasked a murderer before breakfast. By 10 o'clock, she was back at the old manor house, coat unbuttoned, kettle singing. Cherry bustled in with the post and a face full of questions. "Is it true, miss? Captain Wainwright, the one what smiled at me over the turkeys?" "True enough, Cherry, though smiling is no crime." Miss Marple poured tea. "He will hang for the rest, I fear." Cherry crossed herself. "And Miss Lydia? Her finger?" Dr. Haydock reattached it at Much Benham. A Christmas miracle, the surgeons called it. Though I suspect the miracle was Lydia's vanity. She refused anaesthetic lest it dull her complexion. The doorbell rang. Sebastian Drake stood on the step, snowflakes melting on his dark hair, a parcel in his gloved hands. "From Inspector Slack," he said. "Evidence now that Wainwright has confessed. Thought you'd want to see it before it's filed." Miss Marple led him to the sitting room. The parcel was the black velvet stocking from the crypt, still bulging. She opened it with the same caution she might accord a cobra. Inside, the plum pudding, now cut open by police knives, the silver sixpence, Lydia Farrar's finger in a jar of formalin, and a reel of film labelled Master, "Do not project." Drake's mouth tightened. "Wainwright's final cut. Slack says it's too disturbing for court." Miss Marple carried the reel to the window. "Light is the best disinfectant, Mr. Drake, and Christmas Day is for truth." She had borrowed Jefferson Hogg's portable projector, returned now that its owner was helping police with inquiries into accessory after the fact. The sitting-room curtains were drawn. The screen was Cherry's best damask tablecloth pinned to the wall. The film began. Grainy images, the Danemid orchard at twilight. Captain Wainwright, in full-dress uniform, adjusting a miniature camera inside the first gingerbread house. His face was calm, almost tender, as he piped the icing noose. Cut to the bakehouse. Lydia bound, eyes wide, Wainwright whispering lines from Macbeth. "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" Cut to the churchyard. Geoffrey Lestrange chloroformed, the camera lingering on the ribbon bough. Each scene was meticulously lit, the ribbon colours vivid against the snow, the final sequence, the nursery fireplace, Wainwright slicing the pudding, blue flame dancing. He lifted the mask, his own face distorted with triumph, and spoke directly to the lens. For Valerie, who laughed, for Lydia, who pitied, for the village that forgot its sons, Merry Christmas. The screen went black. A single frame lingered, a gingerbread star with the words, "The End." Cherry, peering from the doorway, gave a small squeak and fled to the kitchen. Drake lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. He planned it for months. The camera in every parcel. The ribbons to match the victim's wardrobe. He even used my agency file on Valerie to time the threats. Miss Marple rewound the reel. A soldier's precision. But soldiers follow orders. Who gave the orders, Mr. Drake? He frowned. Wainwright acted alone. His confession? Confessions are like Christmas crackers. full of noise and surprises. Wainwright filmed everything, yet the first murder, Mrs. Clement, was not on film. Why? Drake stubbed out the cigarette. Opportunity. She was killed before he perfected the camera trick. Or because Mrs. Clement was not part of the script. Miss Marple opened her notebook to a fresh page. 25th of December, Old Manor House film, Wainwright's confession. Missing, Mrs. Clement sequence. Anomaly, Hilda Clement knew the killer's childhood secret. Observation, the pudding was never meant to be eaten. The poison was theatrical. But someone ensured the orphans would be safe. Tipped slack anonymously. She tapped the page. Someone else knew the plan and sabotaged the finale. Who benefited from Wainwright's arrest? Drake's eyes narrowed. Hogg? He supplied the camera, the cyanide, and destroyed the master reel, or so he claimed. Yet here it is. She held up the film. Delivered by Slack, who received it from anonymous post, Christmas morning. Miss Marple stood. We must return to Mead. The pudding's core is still poisoned. The great house was quiet, the aftermath of drama. Mrs. Bantry met them in the hall, apron askew, eyes red-rimmed. Jane, thank heaven, the orphans ate jelly and wept for joy. But Lydia, she's vanished again, left a note, gone to London, cannot bear the village stairs. Miss Marple's gaze swept the hall. The Christmas tree was gone, replaced by a mountain of unopened presents for the orphanage. On the mantel, the red stocking Valerie's hung limp and empty. "May I see the kitchen?" she asked. Mrs. Muswell led them to the scene of domestic industry. The great range glowed, copper pans gleamed. On the table stood a second plum pudding, smaller, decorated with holly. "The spare," Mrs. Muswell explained. "Captain Wainwright insisted we make two. Said one was, for the church, one for the house. I thought it odd, but orders is orders." Miss Marple examined the pudding. The holly berries were plastic, identical to those in the first threatening parcel. She cut a slice. Inside, a silver sixpence, a sprig of mistletoe, and a tiny envelope sealed with red wax. Drake slit the envelope. Inside, a photograph, Wainwright as a schoolboy, arms around a younger Hilda Clement, both smiling at a village fete. On the back, in childish scrawl, Auntie Hilda and Tommy, 1932. "Tommy?" Drake said. "Thomas Wainwright," Miss Marple murmured, "Mrs. Clement's nephew. She raised him after his parents died. The land she left Valerie was his inheritance, stolen by a codicil when Valerie married." Mrs. Muswell gasped, but the captain said the captain lied. He killed his aunt to reclaim the land, then spiraled into madness. The theatrical murders were to punish the village for forgetting him. Drake's face was grim. "And the second pudding?" "Insurance. If the first failed, the second would kill at Christmas dinner. But someone switched the puddings." Miss Marple lifted the holly sprig. Beneath it, the pudding was laced with harmless almond essence. No cyanide. They found Jefferson Hogg in the cinema room, packing equipment. He looked up, startled. "Miss Marple, I was just destroying evidence," she finished. "You switched the puddings. You tipped Slack about the film. Why?" Hogg sank into a velvet chair. "Wainwright was my protégé. Taught him cinematography in the mess. When he started the murders, I thought it was a prank. Then Valerie died. I couldn't stop him, so I mitigated, hid the cyanide, swapped the puddings, posted the reel." Drake's voice was ice. "You let him cut off Lydia's finger." "I tried to stop that too, left the nursery door locked. He picked it." Hogg's hands shook. "I'm a coward, not a killer." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "You saved the orphans, that counts for something, but you will answer to the police." Slack arrived within the hour. Hogg was taken away, protesting tearfully. The second pudding was seized, the kitchen sealed. Mrs. Bantry wept into her apron. "Christmas ruined," she sobbed. "Christmas redeemed," Miss Marple corrected. "The children are safe. The killer is caught. And the pudding," she smiled faintly, "was never the core." That afternoon, the village gathered in the parish hall for the orphans' party. Jelly was eaten, crackers pulled, paper hats worn at rakish angles. Miss Marple sat in a corner, knitting, watching the children's faces. Lydia Farrar arrived at dusk, bandaged but defiant, driven from the station by a chastened Geoffrey Lestrange. She kissed Miss Marple's cheek. "You saved my finger, you dreadful woman! I shall name my next role after you." "Please don't," Miss Marple said. "I prefer anonymity." At 6 o'clock, the church bells rang, for evensong. Miss Marple walked home through the slush, her boots squelching. At her gate, a final parcel waited, small, wrapped in brown paper, no ribbon. Inside, a gingerbread house, perfect, unopened. On the roof, in neat piping, "Thank you." She carried it inside, set it on the mantel beside the first holly sprig. Cherry brought seed cake and tea. "Who's it from, miss?" "Father Christmas," Miss Marple said, belated but sincere. That night she opened her notebook for the last time. 25 December. Resolution killer, Captain Thomas Wainwright. Motive, inheritance plus resentment. Accomplice, Jefferson Hogg. Mitigated harm. Victims, Hilda Clement. Inheritance. Valerie Lestrange. Humiliation. Lydia Farrar. Pity. Saved orphans by switched pudding. Final gift, gratitude. Lesson, even poison can be sweetened by mercy. She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and listened to the village settle into sleep. Outside, the snow had melted entirely. The holly wreaths dripped from lampposts like tired dancers. Christmas was over, but the new year would bring trials, confessions, and perhaps, on a quiet afternoon in St. Mary Mead, another parcel tied with ribbon. Miss Marple smiled into the dark. She was ready. Chapter 9. Reindeer's Red Trail. The mantel clock in the old manor house struck 7 with a chime that seemed to mock the fragile tranquillity of Christmas evening. Miss Marple had allowed herself the luxury of a second slice of Cherry's seed cake, dense with caraway and just the right hint of lemon zest, when the doorbell jangled with urgent violence. Cherry, wiping flour from her hands, answered it to reveal Inspector Slack, his greatcoat shedding snow like an overworked chimney, his moustache bristling with barely contained outrage. "Miss Marple," he barked without preamble, "Captain Wainwright's dead. Hanged himself in the Much Benham cells not 2 hours ago. Used his bedsheet over the bars. Dead before the duty sergeant checked." Miss Marple set down her plate with deliberate calm. "A tragedy, Inspector. May I see the note?" Slack thrust a crumpled sheet of notepaper at her. The message was scrawled in pencil. "I cannot face the regiment's shame. The play is ended. Forgive me." T.W. Cherry peered over her shoulder, eyes wide. Poor man, driven to it by guilt. Miss Marple held the note to the lamplight, her magnifying glass, retrieved from the workbasket, twinkling like a detective's monocle. Guilt, perhaps, but not Captain Wainwright's hand. Observe the W. The loop descends to the left, a left-handed writer. The captain polished his revolver right-handed. I watched him. Slack's face purpled. Forgery! Then who's tying up loose ends? Before she could answer, Sebastian Drake's knock sounded. Sharp, professional. He entered brushing snow from his camel hair coat. "News from Danemead, Miss Marple. Lydia Farrar's vanished again. Room empty, window latch forced. Geoffrey's organising a search party. And this," produced a crimson ribbon from his pocket. was tied to her bedpost, same silk as the parcels. Miss Marple folded the note precisely. The reindeer's red trail begins. Cherry, my galoshes, the lantern from the shed, and my stout umbrella. Mr. Drake, if you would arm yourself. Inspector, your man at the gate. Slack nodded grimly. Full muster. Nobody leaves the village. The quartet set out into the night. The sky was a vault of diamond stars, the air crisp with the promise of more snow. The lane to Mead gleamed black with ice, every puddle a treacherous mirror. At the wrought-iron gates, the life-sized wooden reindeer from the Bantry's lawn stood sentinel, its carved eye winking slyly in the moonlight. Around its neck hung a fresh crimson ribbon, the ends trailing into the snow like spilled blood, frozen in crimson streaks. Miss Marple knelt, gloved fingers tracing the bow. Tied within the hour, the ends are still damp. Selfridge's silk, but the knot is new. A hangman's noose, 7 coils. Drake scanned the woods beyond. Footprints, hoofed, wooden clogs perhaps. Colonel Bantry met them in the porch, shotgun crooked in his arm, face ruddy from exertion and sherry. Jane, thank God! Lydia's tracks lead to the old woods, the ones by the ice house. We've lanterns out, but the snow's coming again. Mrs. Bantry hovered behind, shawl clutched tight. She left a note. Follow the reindeer. He's not finished. Geoffrey's half mad. Thinks it's Wainwright risen. No ghost, Miss Marple said firmly. A director who missed his cue. Lead on, Colonel. The woods enveloped them like a velvet curtain drawing closed. Ancient oaks clawed at the stars. Brambles snagged coats. The hoofprints were theatrical, deep, cloven, spaced for drama. 50 yards in, the first waypoint. A smaller reindeer carved from birch, antlers tinsel-draped, eyes holly berries. At its hooves, a placard in red icing, 8th day. Santa's sleigh runs red. Drake's torch beam danced ahead. Gingerbread again, but the icing's blood. Pigs from the butcher. They pressed on, breath sinking to the crunch of snow. The wind whispered through pines, carrying a faint metallic tang, blood and frost. Another reindeer, pine this time, larger, its flanks slashed with red paint. 9th day. Rudolph's nose glows with vengeance. Colonel Bantry pumped his shotgun. Blasted pantomime. Patience, Miss Marple murmured. The killer scripts for an audience. The trail twisted downhill, skirting the frozen pond where village children skated by day. Here, a third reindeer, life-sized, eyes glowing with battery tea lights. Bound to its antlers. A deerskin parcel, toggled with actual shed antlers. Drake sliced the thongs. Inside, a severed deer antler, sawn fresh, tip-blooded. Wrapped around it, a map of the Mead estate. Yellowed parchment, X's marking the crime scenes. Tree, Clement. Bakehouse, Lydia. Church, dummy. Nursery, pudding. The final X, the ice house, a Victorian relic sunk into the hillside. Trap! Slack growled, radioing reinforcements. Colonel Bantry shouldered his gun. Then we end it. Miss Marple's umbrella tapped the map. Follow, but quietly. He watches. The ice house squatted like a troll's lair. Brick dome ivied, door ajar on rusted hinges. Frost rimed the frame. Blue light pulsed from within, accompanied by the faint whir of machinery. Drake signalled silence, revolver drawn. He eased the door. Cold breath billowed out. Clear, he whispered. The vaulted chamber glittered. Arches vaulted high, walls sheened with eternal frost. Sawdust-strewn floor crunched. Centre stage, a slab of ice, Lydia Farrar atop it, porcelain pail, wrists and ankles bound with crimson ribbons. A gingerbread reindeer mask iced over her eyes. Icicles crowned her hair like a frozen tiara. Her chest rose shallowly. Alive, drugged. Lydia! Mrs. Bantry lunged, but Miss Marple restrained her. "Wait, the projector!" On a tripod beside the slab, a miniature cinecamera whirred, filming. Cables snaked to batteries in the sawdust. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, from the shadows. A figure emerged, Jefferson Hogg, swathed in a reindeer hide coat, antlers strapped to his bald pate, face smeared with red grease paint. In his right hand, a butcher's cleaver dripped viscous red. Left clutched a clapperboard. Scene 27. The reveal. Take one. "You came," Hogg boomed, voice echoing off ice. "My final reel, starring the meddlesome spinster." Drake levelled his revolver. "Drop the cleaver, Hogg." Hogg laughed, a Hollywood villain's cackle. "Too late, Sebastian. The ice melts." He kicked a lever. The slab groaned. Water gushed from beneath, pooling ankle-deep. Lydia stirred, moaning. Colonel Bantry fired, a warning blast shattering an icicle shower. "Stand down!" Hogg charged, cleaver high. Drake sidestepped, tripped him into sawdust. They grappled, Hogg's bulk versus Drake's precision. Slack's constables burst in, torches blazing. Miss Marple circled the slab, umbrella prying the mask. Lydia's eyes fluttered, chloroformed, but breathing. "The film!" she gasped. "He directed." Hogg bucked free, antlers shedding tinsel. "Wainwright was my puppet. The land. Clement stole it from me in 32, gave it to her nephew. I scripted revenge, a Christmas epic. He executed. I filmed. But he cracked. Suicide my forgery. Now I finish. Drown the actress, frame the spinster." Drake pinned him. Cuffs clicked. "The camera caught you." Hogg sagged, grinning. "Art requires sacrifice. Roll credits." Police swarmed. Dr. Haydock arrived, reviving Lydia with sal volatile and brandy flask. Mrs. Bantry enveloped her in shawls. Back at Dane Mead, under library lamps, Hogg confessed voluminously. "Wainwright, my mess protégé, taught him camera tricks. Resentment festered, village forgot us veterans. Clement's will the spark. I planned the gifts, ribbons, nursery rhymes. He killed her. I filmed. Valerie laughed at us, poisoned. Lydia pitied, abducted. The pudding, my blue flame flourish. Switched it myself. Couldn't poison orphans. Posted the reel to Slack. But Wainwright's arrest forced my hand." Miss Marple nodded. "The reindeer's trail. Your escape script. Antlers from the gamekeeper's shed." Hogg bowed his head. "Bravo, Miss Marple. You steal my thunder." Dawn crept as police led him away. The woods fell silent, red ribbons fluttering like surrendered flags. Miss Marple walked home alone, lantern dimming. At her gate, one final reindeer, tiny gingerbread, perched with a bow. 9th day ends. Bow tomorrow. She smiled, pocketing it, the trail complete, but climax awaited. Chapter 10. Unwrapping the Final Bow. The morning of December 26th, Boxing Day, arrived in a hush of pale gold light that turned the slush to molten silver and the village roofs to gingerbread. St. Mary Mead woke slowly, as though the events of Christmas had been a fever dream best forgotten. The church bell tolled 9. The Blue Boar opened its doors to a subdued clientele, nursing hangovers and gossip. Miss Marple, however, was already at her desk, fountain pen moving with the precision of a surgeon across the final pages of her notebook. 26 December, Old Manor House Killer. Dr. 1, Captain Thomas Wainwright, executed murders. Killer number 2, Jefferson Hogg, mastermind, staged finale. Motive, revenge for forgotten veterans, plus land inheritance, Hilda Clement's will. Method, theatrical gifts, filmed crimes, nursery rhyme escalation. Final bow, today, public village green. She underlined the last line, closed the book, and rang for Cherry. "Breakfast, miss." Cherry bustled in, apron crisp, eyes bright with the thrill of survival. "Toast and marmalade, my dear, and ask Mr. Drake to join me at 10. We have a curtain call." At 10 sharp, Sebastian Drake arrived, overcoat unbuttoned, a newspaper under his arm. The headline screamed, "Village Killer Caught, Film Director Confesses." Beneath, a smaller item, Boxing Day Hunt, Meat Moved to Village Green, Tradition Restored. Miss Marple poured coffee. The hunt meet, traditionally at Mead, but the Colonel yielded to public sentiment. The Green at 11. Every soul in St. Mary Mead will attend. Children, dogs, brass band, the perfect stage. Drake's eyes narrowed. Hogs in custody. Wainwright's dead. Who's left to pull the curtain? She produced the tiny gingerbread reindeer from her pocket, the one left at her gate. The final gift, inside the bow, a message. She unfolded a scrap of rice paper, no larger than a stamp. In red icing, 11:15. The hunt begins. Bring the star. Drake turned the paper over. Blank on the back, no signature. None needed, Miss Marple said. The star is Lydia Farrar. She returned to Dinmead at dawn, telephoned Mrs. Bantry in hysterics, claims she must finish the performance or the village will never be safe. Drake swore softly. Trap. Or redemption, Miss Marple corrected. Lydia believes herself, the final victim. We must ensure she becomes the final witness. They walked to the village green together, boots crunching on a frost-rimed grass. The scene was pure Dickens. The brass band tuning up beside the war memorial, children in paper hats chasing hoops, the hunt assembled in pink coats and polished boots, horses steaming in the cold. Colonel Bantry, master of hounds, raised a stirrup cup to the crowd. Mrs. Bantry distributed mince pies from a trestle table. Geoffrey Lestrange stood apart, pale but composed, a black armband on his sleeve. At 11:10, the band struck up the holly and the ivy. Lydia Farrar appeared at the edge of the green, swathed in Valerie's sable coat, a crimson ribbon tied dramatically around her throat. Her bandaged hand was gloved. Her eyes blazed with theatrical fire. She carried a silver hunting horn, borrowed from the Colonel's collection. "People of St. Mary Mead," she cried, voice carrying like a trumpet. "Your Christmas killer is unmasked, but the play is not ended. I am the final act." The crowd murmured. Children cheered, thinking it pantomime. The hounds bayed. Colonel Bantry spurred his horse forward, but Miss Marple raised her umbrella like a conductor's baton. "Wait," she called. "Let the lady speak." Lydia lifted the horn and blew a single piercing note. From the bandstand, a projector, Hogs Portable, smuggled from evidence, word to life. A white sheet, hastily pinned between the memorial and the oak, became a screen. The film began. Not Wainwright's grainy confession, nor Hogg's reindeer rampage, but a new reel, crisp, professional. The title card, The Christmas Present Killer, final cut. Scene 1, the village green, filmed from the church tower. The hunt assembled, exactly as now. Lydia centre frame, horn raised, a red ribbon fluttered from the oak. Scene 2, close-up of the ribbon. It untied itself, impossible, yet there it was, revealing a tiny gingerbread house no larger than a matchbox. The roof lifted. Inside, a mirror, reflected in it, every face in the crowd. Scene 3, the mirror shattered, cut to black, the projector stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the hound's uneasy whining. Lydia's voice rang out. "The killer filmed us all! We are the presents, wrapped in ribbon, waiting to be opened." A child began to cry. The bandleader dropped his baton. Then, from the oak, a real ribbon, crimson silk, unfurled like a banner. Tied to it, a parcel the size of a hatbox, swaying gently. Drake moved first, revolver drawn. "Stay back!" But Miss Marple was already beneath the tree, umbrella hooked through the ribbon. She lowered the parcel with the calm of a woman retrieving laundry. The crowd watched, breathless. The tag read, "For the village, open on the green." She sliced the ribbon. Gold paper parted. Inside, a gingerbread village, perfect miniature of St. Mary Mead. Church, pub, post office, Dane Mead, the old manor house. Every roof iced, with a tiny noose. In the centre, on the green itself, a gingerbread figure in a grey coat and felt hat, Miss Marple, unmistakable. Beneath the figure, a card, the final bow. Curtain falls at noon. The church clock began to strike 12. Lydia laughed, a wild, triumphant sound. "It's me! I'm the star!" She tore the ribbon from her throat, revealing not a bow but a key, brass, antique. The projector booth in the church tower, the master reel, everything. She ran. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Drake and Slack gave chase, but Lydia was fleet in her terror. She reached the church porch, key already in the lock. Miss Marple did not run. She opened a handbag, removed the tiny gingerbread reindeer, and pressed its belly. A faint click. The church tower door swung open from within. Lydia froze. From the shadows stepped Nurse Hartnell, apron starched, sailor's tattoo peeking from her sleeve. In her hands the master reel, labelled True Final Cut. "You?" Lydia whispered. "Me," Nurse Hartnell said, "and Mrs. Wainwright, and every soul you forgot." She held up the reel. "This is the real film. Wainwright's crimes, yes. Hogg's direction, yes. But the first murder, Hilda Clement, that was mine." The crowd gasped. Slack's constables closed in. Miss Marple's voice carried across the green. "Enid Hartnell, née Clement, Hilda's daughter, disinherited when the will favoured Valerie. You nursed Mrs. Wainwright to learn the knots, the gingerbread recipes. You forged Wainwright's suicide note to silence him. You staged Lydia's abductions to keep the drama alive. The reindeer trail, your brother's old theatrical props from the merchant navy." Nurse Hartnell's face crumpled. "Mother raised Tommy after our parents died. Left him everything. I got nothing but debts. Hogg promised revenge. A film to shame the village. Wainwright was the blade. I was the hand." Lydia lunged for the reel. Drake caught her, gentle but firm. "It's over, Miss Farrar." The projector in the tower whirred again, this time controlled by Slack's man. The True Final Cut played. Enid Hartnell in the Clement cottage, axe raised over her sleeping mother. Enid piping icing in the Dane Mead kitchen. Enid tying the first ribbon. Enid laughing as Wainwright hanged himself, her forged note in his hand. The village watched in silence. When the screen went black, the only sound was the wind in the oak. Enid Hartnell was led away, head high, a sailor to the end. Lydia collapsed into Geoffrey's arms, sobbing. The hunt was cancelled, the hounds led home. The gingerbread village was parcelled into evidence bags, each house a confession. Miss Marple stood beneath the oak, the tiny gingerbread Miss Marple in her palm. She turned it over. On the base, in microscopic icing, you saw the truth. Cherry arrived with a thermos of tea. "All done, miss. All done," Miss Marple said. "Though I suspect the village will dine out on this for years." That evening, the old manor house was quiet. Miss Marple sat by the fire, knitting a scarf in festive red. Her notebook lay closed on the table, case complete. Outside, the first snow of the new year began to fall, soft and forgiving. The doorbell rang once more. Cherry admitted Lydia Farrar, sable coat discarded, face scrubbed of grease paint. "I came to thank you," she said, "and to return this." She placed the silver hunting horn on the table. "The village is safe, because of you." Miss Marple smiled. "The village was always safe, my dear. It merely needed to see itself clearly." Lydia kissed her cheek and left. Miss Marple lifted the horn, blew a single clear note that echoed through the cottage like a benediction. Cherry peeked in. "Supper, miss." "Supper," Miss Marple agreed, "and perhaps a slice of Christmas pudding, the safe one Mrs. Bantry sent over. After all, the bow is unwrapped. Let us enjoy the gift." She opened her notebook one last time, wrote a single line, and closed it forever. Boxing Day. Resolution. The final bow is silence and tea.